Hey Illuminate teens, good to get with you again today, give you a lesson, and we're going to be going over to Genesis chapter 39. So if you just want to go ahead and travel right over there in your Bible and look that up, we'll be looking through some verses, and we'll head through in chapter 40 and 41 here as we go along. But we're going to be talking about how God redeems adversity. And you mean, what do you mean by that? Well, sometimes we're in adversity in our life, and God will actually make that a positive thing. And you say, what do you mean in this passage? What are you talking about? Well, God uses Joseph's circumstances and sufferings to accomplish his plans and his purposes. And it's good stuff for Joseph. He's dealing through a lot of difficult things, but yet it ends up all good in the end. And we actually find out that his dreams that he had had before actually come true. We find out that they come true. And so when you get into this, we'll be talking about this doctrine of God's providence again. I know that's one of the doctrines that we dealt with before, but God is in control and he works through in his plan. He's very active within his creation that he did create. He's still active today with you and with me. And so as we see that with Joseph, we'll be encouraged as God uses some of our difficult circumstances for something that is good. Now, Joseph went from being the favorite to being sold into slavery. I mean, wow, what a way to go, in the sense of that he was exalted and yet then he was humbled. He was alone. He was thrown into a foreign land. He was a teenager. I mean, this was difficult stuff. And I wonder how he was praying in the midst of all this. You know, we didn't get every single word that he said as we see in Scripture, okay? There's just tidbits of this life. There's so much that's going on in the midst of his life that we don't get. We don't get every single aspect, but I wonder what he was praying in the midst of all these difficult trials. What have you prayed for that God didn't answer the way that you'd hoped? Have you ever had that? The way that you prayed in a certain way, maybe at this point you're a senior and you're saying, well, you know what, God, could you just get rid of this coronavirus so I could go back to my senior year and have all my normal stuff and all my expected things, and yet not working out so great, is it? A lot of different activities that are being canceled because of what's going on. And it's looking like you won't be able to actually finish out your year in person. It'll all be online. So you don't have all the fun things that you're looking forward to, and yet maybe you've prayed for that. Maybe with a job situation, you've been praying a certain way, and God, would you just work this out? Would you work this out? And yet it's not seeming to go the way that you had hoped. But as you look back in the future, or maybe you look back in a certain situation that you prayed about in the past, as you look back, how do you think God's working in this whole entire situation? What is he trying to grasp with you or help you to grasp? What is he trying to help you learn through this whole entire process? So that's something that you need to be thinking about. And nothing is a waste. Nothing is a waste that God puts us through. And so we need to open up our eyes and see how God is working in our life. So here he is, Joseph as a teen going into a foreign land. How do you think he felt in the midst of this foreign land? Do you think he expected all these things to happen? Do you think he enjoyed all these things to happen that happened to him? I don't think so. I don't think he expected it. I don't think he enjoyed it. I mean, he was struggling through this process, and we see that in these chapters. But yet he had a totally different response than what we would probably respond. How we would respond in this situation. And so when you see this, ask yourself, how would you respond if you were put in the same predicaments that Joseph is, or how you're responding in some tough things that you're dealing with today? All right? So here he is. He's alone in a foreign land. He's been sold by his own brothers, and he doesn't know this, but his dad thinks he's dead. So his dad's not even coming after him. And you think, well, maybe there's this glimmer of hope in his thought process. Well, my dad will come and get me. Dad thinks he's dead, so he's not going to go get him. Interesting thought process. But as you get into Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 6, it says, "And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, And Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So the Potiphar was so blessed because of what Joseph had done and how God had blessed there. And Joseph was actively involved and being successful where he was placed, even in the situation that he didn't choose for himself. But he was choosing to prosper in the situation that he was placed in. And Potiphar is recognizing and seeing that God was blessing. And Potiphar was so content with all that God had done and Joseph was doing that he put him in second in command. And Potiphar didn't even know what he had except for the bread that he was putting in his own mouth. That's how okay he was with Joseph. Okay? But what happens here? You know, we need to ask this question before we even move forward. When have you felt God's presence in the midst of your own tough circumstances? Or maybe you're questioning his presence in the midst of your circumstances. And let me ask this, would it be easier to focus on God? Would it be easier to get through your trials by focusing on God or focusing on your circumstances? I think you know the answer to that. And this is what Joseph was doing. He was focused. But you know what? Potiphar's wife kind of liked Joseph. And she wanted to get with him. I mean, she wanted to hook up. And Joseph wasn't ready for that. He didn't want it. He ran away from it. And he says, hey, I'm not going to sin against my God. I'm not going to sin against Potiphar. He's given me everything within this house except for you. And Joseph makes the right decision. But yet, she doesn't like that. She's used to getting her way. And so what does she do? She accuses him falsely of trying to take advantage of her. Whoa. Are you kidding? If you didn't think it was fair before, it's definitely not going to be fair now, because guess what? Potiphar throws him in jail because of it. Wait, don't you want to check the evidence? It's not like they could just go back to the security cameras and check that out, right? He's going to believe his wife over Joseph. And so he gets thrown into jail. How do you think you would respond in this situation? Again, putting yourself in Joseph's shoes. Sandals. But in Genesis chapter 39 and verse 19 through 23, it says, And it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. He was angry. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So, God's in the midst of it the whole entire time, and blessed them there as well. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. Whatsoever they did there, he was a doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So again, Joseph's doing his best in the circumstances that he's put in, and he's made in charge of all the prisoners. And if you are thinking this in the midst of it, well, if we do what's right and I do my best and I get handed more responsibility, I don't want that. You're thinking in a selfish and a negative way. You're not getting it. That's not the point. The point is this: when you are responsible with what God gives you in the circumstances that you didn't even choose, God blesses. That's an amazing thing. God blesses. Now, how does that work itself out? Well, in each circumstance, it's different. But God blesses those who become content in their circumstances and do what is right. Okay? So, why is it important to do what's right despite the outcome? Because God can bless you in that. We stand before God. That's who we answer to. Okay? And what lesson can we learn from Joseph's victory? It doesn't always go as planned, but yet Joseph knew that he had done it correctly. And there's a peace there. And God knew that he had done it correctly and saying no to this temptation. There's so much to the story. All right, so all of a sudden you find out in the next little bit how there is two guys in the prison. There's a cupbearer and a baker, and they both have dreams, and they're concerned about it. And Joseph ends up being given the understanding by God to be able to give these dreams, the explanations to it. The cupbearer, he has a dream about a grapevine. It has 3 branches. There's grapes that grow on it. He takes the grapes and he squeezes it into the Pharaoh's cup. And Joseph says, in 3 days, the 3 branches, you'll be let go and you'll be restored back to your position serving Pharaoh. It happened. There's a baker in the prison. And he says, I've got 3 baskets of bread on my head. Okay? But then instead of being able to serve it to Pharaoh, these birds come and eat it all. Joseph says, in 3 days, you're going to be put to death. You're not going to be restored. You're going to be put to death. Guess what? It happened. But with the cupbearer, Joseph says, remember me when you're let go. Tell Pharaoh that I was falsely accused. And he says, oh, yeah, I'll remember you. Guess what? He didn't. Is that fair? He doesn't feel fair. And yet, Joseph still remains true and faithful. But 2 years later, finally, the cupbearer remembers when Pharaoh has a dream. 2 dreams. 7 fat cows eat 7 skinny cows. I know, super weird, but there's a point. 7 heads of grain, fat heads, prosperous heads of grain, eat 7 skinny, famine-like heads of grain. And you say, what happens? Well, the cupbearer says, hey, Joseph knew the explanation of my dream. I bet you he could do the same thing because nobody was explaining it to Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was just going crazy about this. So he brings Joseph out. Joseph says, God's going to help me and give me the answer to this and give you peace in the midst of this. And so he explains it. He says there's going to be 7 years of good crops. Everything's going to be going good. And then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And you need to put somebody in charge that's going to set it up to where you have food all the way through to the end. Now, Pharaoh recognized that Joseph was blessed by God, that he was being used by God, that God was working in his life. So guess what? He makes Joseph in charge, has second command over Egypt. And over the next 7 years, he blesses, and they were able to be a blessing to all the lands around because they had enough food to sell to all the people around, including Joseph's family. And they took care of him. So how does Christ get connected here? Christ went from heaven, humbled to earth, just like Joseph went from exalted position, humbled. They both went through trials. What? To save. Joseph was there and used to save his own family. Christ is used to save his people. Wow. What a beautiful story. How would you respond? And is it easier to show kindness or bitterness during your trials? How are you choosing to respond in your trials today, in your life, this week? How are you representing God? How are you being content in the circumstances that God gives you so he can bless you? We'll talk to you later, teens.